Yeah, well, good afternoon, everyone. It's Andrew Benson from Expound Decision Systems, and this session is being recorded and is organized really to provide you with an orientation, a high level orientation around the NC Care data as it can be shown through the business intelligence system, as well as some other tools that will allow you to explore the data a little bit more and run quality checks and just investigate the quality of the database. So I just intend to give you a sort of a high level overview today of the data, the tools, and there will be near future sessions set up to walk through more details. And as well as we build this sort of BI bridge as we walk on it, then I will of course be presenting more content to you and hopefully increasing sort of your comfort level with the tools that you'll see for the first time probably today. So we have with us, and we'll take a couple of moments just to get a better sense of everyone's sort of background and comfort level with tools and technology. But I'm showing that we have Kelsey, Leah, Lynn, Sue, Tabitha. I believe we're expecting April to join us, and a few could not join us today, including I think it was Amanda and one other individual who I don't have the list in front of me. But regardless, we're going to record the session. I will post it up onto a private YouTube channel or playlist where you can either view the data or the video recording for the first time, but if you're on the call as well, you can also use it to refresh your memory as to what we talked about today. So I'm going to cover the following topics today. I'm going to introduce you just to the project from my perspective. I won't spend too much time on that, as I assume that you already are familiar with sort of the objectives and sort of the types of data that we're working with. But I'd like to just sort of introduce you to the pillar data and the process of building out the NC Care platform and how we're actually doing that. I like to always kind of demystify what's going on in the background, even if you don't have a technical background. I like to sort of share with folks how things work on the back end, because often as an analyst, you're working with the data through the tools that you'll be seeing today, but there's a lot of things that go on in behind the scenes, and sometimes it's important for you to know how the data got there in the first place. So I'll try and walk you through some of the processes that are used to bring your iCarol data sort of to life in the BI environment. Then we're going to jump into some of the actual reports that have been built. This is sort of, again, building the bridge as we walk on it here, but we've got a couple of reports that are up and running. So I'll show you how to use those reports to investigate sort of the quality of the NC Care data. And we'll then take a bit of a dive into using the Analyze in Excel tool so that you can ask questions that might not be answerable through the reporting data. So I'm just going to pause there for a moment, and I'm just going to ask maybe if we could everyone introduce themselves and maybe just provide me a sense of your comfort with technology. We're going to be talking about different tools today like Excel or working with the Power BI environment. So if you can just give me a general sense of your comfort level with working with technology, but in particular Excel and business intelligence, and then I'll wrap up with sort of my background and sort of what my expectations are for sort of the near future in terms of us working together with these tools. So perhaps I can start with you, Kelsey. And don't forget to come off mute as well, everyone.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, can.
So I've done a little bit with 2-in-1 before with my You Are the AmeriCorps, but I haven't done any of the like the Power BI stuff. But I feel fairly comfortable with Excel because I had to use that a lot with my You Are the AmeriCorps too. So I'm usually better with stuff after I've practiced it for a little bit. So
Yeah, we all are. Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks, Kelsey.
hmm
All right, Leah.
I would say similarly, I use Excel quite a bit. And I was there for your Power BI training and tried to absorb as much as I could, but I would say I'm definitely rusty with Power BI.
Okay, no problem. We'll go over that again. I think everyone will be comfortable probably in the next couple of months. Lynn.
Just to echo the previous two ladies' comments, I've had quite a history with Excel. I'm very comfortable with it, but as far as business intelligence applications, the closest I ever got is to Salesforce, and even then, that's very, very rudimentary.
Okay, that's fine. Thanks, Lynn. Sue.
Hey, same as others. I'm comfortable with Excel, but new to other stuff. But I've worked with a database before, so I feel pretty comfortable that I can pick it up quickly.
Okay, great. Thanks, Sue. And Tabitha.
I guess similar to everybody else, at my previous job, I did pull a lot of data from different systems and into Excel, and filtered it and had to make reports and pull information from it to go back to funders and things like that. So I like to do a lot of the dissecting end of things.
Great. Okay. Well, actually, that's much better than what I was anticipating. If you're comfortable with Excel, then you probably are going to like part of today's presentation, which will be how do you actually connect to the data that, although it's presented in reports, you actually have access to it directly through Excel. So we'll talk about that a little bit later, but you'll see the data that's being presented in the business intelligence reports. I'll just show you how to get sort of comfortable with that. For those of you who aren't familiar with me, my name is Andrew Benson, of course, and so I'm responsible for building out the state repository or shared repository, as we're calling it, for the NCCARE360 initiative. And essentially that will be a statewide resource database that will draw from the 211 North Carolina iCarol database, at least to start, and will then filter a subset of the full records that you have inside the state system. So we're classifying those as pillar data. So not all the 211 NC data is going into the state repository, but we'll walk through some of that a little later. But my responsibility is essentially to build that state repository and make that repository accessible through a set of what's called application programming interfaces, which is nothing more than really a programmatic way for systems to extract data from the statewide repository. We'll be starting with a API that enables the Unitas platform to consume data out of the state repository, that NCCARE360 system. I'll walk through a few diagrams that hopefully will bring this a little bit more to life. On top of that, we also included in this initiative a set of monitoring and business intelligence tools that allow not just us internally, but as well others to access the information on the repository itself. So that might be the nature of the data, the scope of the data. So for example, the total number of services or locations of the NCCARE360 programs and services that will appear. So being able to sort of understand where these resources are located, the type of resources, and just get a sort of a general feel for the overall scope and nature of the data in the repository. So we propose a set of business intelligence tools that will allow people to sort of visualize the directory rather than look at just the straight data. So we might be familiar with looking at data through a website where the resources appear as a directory or on a map. So the business intelligence sort of brings different metrics to light through doing counts and performing other statistics on the data. And we'll walk through that, of course, through the course of today and as well as some future meetings as well. So that's my responsibility, is essentially to bring the state repository together, put the BI tools on top, and make the APIs available for other platforms to consume the data. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you sort of a general overview. I'm not going to spend too much time on it because it's a bit technical, but I'll try and break it down into user-friendly terms. I want to give you a sense of sort of how the repository comes together, how it links into your iCarol database, and then what we do with it in order to bring the data to life, as you'll see within the reports and in Excel. I also encourage you at any time, I'm going to minimize this window here. You can probably see it on screen right now, but it's the GoToMeeting. So I won't be monitoring the chat. I encourage you, especially because it's quite informal, if everyone's on mute, then there won't be any background noise, but please come off mute and ask a question. either to interrupt me because I haven't been clear, and I promise you over the course of the next hour or so, I probably am not going to be clear on some terms or have not explained it to the degree that I need to for this audience. So please interrupt me with questions or clarifications. And as well, I will leave lots of time at the end of the presentation for general discussion or clarification of any terms I've gone over. And I'll try and take some moments during the course of the presentation as well for you to jump in and ask some questions. Okay. So let me go ahead and minimize this. So what we're looking at here is essentially what's being presented within 2 slides for an external presentation for the NCCARE360 initiative that involves at least the state repository system. And basically we describe a world in which resource data comes from many different places, whether it be a 211 or a non-211. I'm talking more about the United States now in general, but data can come from many places, and it can also come from many different platforms. Just in sort of the INR industry alone, there's about 4 or 5 key players, including iCarol, which is the biggest application, VisionLink, Refer, and a few others as well. So what this does is basically there's 2 pain points. One is that the data can come from anywhere, and then that data that comes from anywhere can also come through one of several systems. So what you're looking at on the left is basically a description of the problem where data comes from many sources, through many applications. And then the challenge is then if you're trying to build a statewide repository, how do you pull that data together into sort of a single look and feel of the data? Because as you can imagine, data, even simple things like data fields that are named differently, are very difficult then to merge together. So essentially the challenge was, how do we take data from different places that come through different applications and create one standardized set of data that would of course be required for the NCCARE360 resource repository. So we're showing from left to right here the disaggregated data coming from many different places, many sources, and then somehow being magically transformed into a trusted repository of data regardless of the source or the original sort of application which the data was created. So what was proposed as part of the NCCARE360 initiative, and I'm only focusing on the repository piece, that's my role in all of this, is that we essentially proposed that there would be 6 steps in which we would take in order to create that trusted repository. The first and probably the most important is that we receive that data through the 211 North Carolina iCarol database. Very important because that allows us to ensure that the business rules that are already implemented through the iCarol application are enforced, so that we have good quality data right at source, and that's the iCarol platform. And of course, the work of the INR specialists or the certified resource specialists, or even if they're not certified, those working with inside the 211 North Carolina platform are responsible for ensuring that the data is complete, it's accurate, and it remains fresh. So with those 2 things, the receive and validate in place, we're pushing or replicating that data from iCarol. So, and I'll show you what that looks like in a second. But we're essentially replicating your full database into a separate database that's owned and operated by 211 North Carolina. So this is essentially just a copy of all of your iCarol data into what we'll call basically like a staging database, or just basically a holding place for all of the data. From there, then we determine the data that's available in your replicated iCarol database. We determine which of those records need to come over into the NCCARE360 platform. And of course, because we're focusing on now 6 pillars, we identify that data through the taxonomy terms assigned. So essentially we have, for example, an employment pillar that would have a handful of taxonomy terms associated to that pillar of employment. And then we match all the records in the 211 North Carolina database that have one or more of those taxonomy terms assigned. So essentially what we're trying to do is pull out or filter the data based on the type of data it is, and if it matches one of the NCCARE360 pillars, then it goes into the state platform. And then we publish that data so that it's accessible for others to use. So this basically is just a workflow of how the data is sourced from iCarol right through to being published for others to use. Just stop there and ask if there's any questions or clarifications. Okay, and whoops, sorry, close this down here. I won't belabor this diagram here, but just to sort of give you a visual representation or high-level overview of sort of what the data looks like, the path that it travels. So here within inside of the call center and the different locations in which you manage the iCarol data, essentially we're using the iCarol data, we're replicating it into the repository. And then on top of the repository, as I mentioned, we have reporting capabilities so that we can sort of look at the quality of the data, but also display sort of the scope and nature of that data as well. So some of those reports will be available for others to access. And on the other side of this repository is a set of APIs. And what we're showing here is in the first phase that, and some of the dates are off, so ignore the dates, but the Unitas platform will essentially consume the data from the state repository through this thing called a API, or an application programming interface. This is important because this is how the data will be consumed by other organizations in the future. But essentially what you can see, and probably the main point here, excuse me, is that we have a separate instance of the data repository from your actual iCarol data. So what I'd like to do now is, and this is the last thing I'll do, just sort of take out the mystery of some of this stuff. And I heard that one or two of you have worked or at least are familiar with databases. So I just want to show you sort of what this looks like in behind the scenes. So what we're looking at is essentially a server, and a server just manages multiple databases. And what we have is this NCCARE360 server. So it's sort of a logical server, meaning that's not an actual physical server. It actually sits in the cloud. It's in Microsoft Azure. And what happens every night is iCarol, not every night, almost up to the minute, iCarol is replicating. Let me blow this up a little bit more for you here. And these aren't things that you need to know. I just sort of like, again, trying to take some of the mystery out of a lot of this stuff for you. Hopefully that's big enough. You don't really need to see the tables too much. But what iCarol does basically every minute of the day is they're replicating across the data that's created in the iCarol platform. And these tables with DBO in front of it, these are all the iCarol proprietary tables. So this is essentially what your iCarol application looks like from a database perspective. And you, of course, never see this. But what we do is we replicate across all the data within these tables, and within each one of these tables, I mean, there's literally dozens of pieces of information, like the location information of programs and services, phone numbers for contacts, so on and so forth. But the important point is that the iCarol data is replicated across in its proprietary structure. And then and going back to that slide where we have to basically take data in different structures, formats coming from different places, we've decided to standardize that data using the open referral format. So that's, you can see these tables labeled HSDS. So essentially what we're doing is we're taking all the data from iCarol's proprietary structure and we're remapping it into a structure that we're more familiar and comfortable with. So, and that's the Human Services Data Specification, which is a product of the open referral movement. It's more of a specification than a standard. But this is important because what it does is it simplifies the data model, and it also creates a standard that And of course, starting in North Carolina, you can imagine that if other states come on board, then if everyone's calling the information or the data the same thing, then it's a lot easier for people to work together as a community. So I'll give you an example is that in the HSDS service table, we have information on the name of the service, the alternate name of the service, the status of the service, the application process. These are things, of course, that you'd be familiar with through the iCarol application itself. So what I just want to get across here is that essentially we're taking the iCarol data and we're remapping it into the Human Services Data Specification Standard. And that standard's made up of about, as you can see here, about 12 or 14 tables. And then the business intelligence system then takes those 14 or 16 tables and condenses them down into 2 or 3 tables that you're going to see and work with in the future. So I think that what I'd like to get across here is that we take the iCarol data, we map it across almost second by second, so we've got a copy of it. We put it into a standard format, and then for business intelligence, what we do is we take all of those tables that you can see marked as HSDS, and then create 3 or 4 separate tables that you will use to investigate the data itself using whether it be Excel or Power BI. The last thing I'll mention here is that you're looking at the NCCARE360 database, but this is a product that's owned. So this database would be owned by 211 United Way, North Carolina. And this is not the data that's exposed in the state repository. Essentially, this is your full copy of all of your iCarol data, which is about 16,000 programs and services. And that data sits in this repository. And essentially what we do is within this database, we prepare the NCCARE360 data, which is a subset of your 15,000 records. There's about 4,000 services that make up the NCCARE repository at the moment, made up of 6 pillars, which we'll go through a little bit later. But we take that subset of data and we populate a set of tables called the NCCARE360 tables. And then that's what gets replicated into a separate database, which I won't go into, but essentially we've got this other database which underpins basically the state repository. Okay. The database that you'll be working with or have access to the data on is the NCCARE360 database. And this there's a couple of reasons we're doing that, is that it allows you to look at the full database, so whether it's NCCARE360 data or whether it is data that's not marked for NCCARE360 but is in your iCarol database, we make that available for you to investigate. And I'm going to show you how to use some filters on the reports and in Excel in order to work with either the full data set or the subset of NCCARE360 data. But essentially that's sort of what is happening behind the scenes. As the replication happens basically second by second, copy of that data, and then we reformat that into a standard, and then from that standard grab the NCCARE360 data and do a whole lot of stuff to it so that's usable by external audiences. That's the end of I would say that some of the more conceptual and more complicated technical stuff. So I'm just going to give pause there before I jump into the reporting piece and ask if there's any questions or clarifications. Okay, hearing none. So just remember, I'm very comfortable with people interrupting for clarification, comment, or questions as we walk through this. I'm going to assume that most of you are not familiar with Power BI. So I'm going to walk you through what this thing is that we call Power BI, and I'll walk you through the report content first. What we're looking at on screen, maybe I can actually, I'll leave it here for the moment, this view. What we're looking at is essentially the main window of Power BI. So when you come into Power BI through your Office 365 environment, I understand a number of you don't have Power BI licenses yet, but this will be coming for you. But through Office 365, you can access an app called Power BI. And when you select that app, you will be brought to a home window that is going to look quite different actually for everyone because it depends on the content you have access to. But from this home window, you can get at a number of applications or reports, basically any content within your Power BI environment, your business intelligence environment. What I would strongly encourage people to do, especially working on the NCCARE360 initiative, is under workspaces. So the first thing you would do is go to your workspaces tab, and then you would scroll down and you would find this NCCARE360, what's called an app workspace. You click on the NCCARE360 app workspace, and you can see that the NCCARE360 now workspace is showing here, and there's a bunch of content in here, which I'll show in a second. But essentially, what you'll be brought to is a window which allows you to navigate through all of the content that's published into the NCCARE360 workspace for Power BI. When fully built out, there'll be a number of assets within inside of the business intelligence workspace. There'll be dashboards, there'll be reports, there'll be workbooks, data sets, and we'll ignore data flows for the moment. But essentially an app workspace is where we can all sort of go to view the information, whether it be in report form or whether you're going to navigate to the data through Excel. This is essentially your starting place, is that when you log in, you select the NCCARE360 workspace, and then from the tabs, you're able to select the content. Over time, we will be building a number of reports for not just internal use, but external use. By external, I mean those who are provided license to come in and look at the directory of information, the NCCARE360 data. That could be a Unitas employee, it could be someone from the Foundation for Health and Leadership and Innovation, for example, or it could be a member of the statewide government, for example, DHHS, excuse me, DHHS, or others. But essentially, this is going to be a place where people can come to look at the data through reports. And those reports will be built up over time. Let me walk you through, rather than sort of go through any more of the technical pieces, let me walk you through a first set of reports that has been built to provide you with insight into the data that's available in both the HSDS as well as the NCCARE environment. What you're looking at is, and this is a first cut, so these are reports that have just been drafted, and of course this whole process is more of a sort of an agile and iterative one, in the sense that I'll build something, I'll get feedback from this group in particular. You might want to see certain metrics or counts on things that aren't presented now, but you'd like to see in the future. So this is going to evolve into a set of pages on a report that allow you to sort of understand the data inside the iCarol system. The resource dashboard page. So when I navigate into, and I'll just go down through the NCCARE app workspace, there's a couple ways to get at. I've already showed you sort of that tabular version where you can navigate to dashboards, reports, workbooks, and data sets. You can also just explode the chevron, and it will show you essentially a different view of the same thing. And you can see the only thing that we have available inside the NCCARE360 workspace right now is a report called NCCARE360-data and a data set that basically underpins all of the visuals in this report, NCCARE360-data. I'll show you how to use the data sets in a little while, but that's essentially what you're going to connect to through Excel. The reports is what we're looking at right now. So just refresh this. And the report only has 3 pages. It sort of has some powerful features to it that allow you to get at details inside the data, which I'll demonstrate. But essentially, this first page gives you sort of a glimpse of the data. And this is data that's currently filtered for just NCCARE360. What we have is a count on the number of services, a count on the number of organizations, and a count on the number of locations. So if you're familiar with with sort of the AIR's representation of resource data, it's the agency site service model. So the services, of course, self-explanatory. Agencies, organizations, I use that interchangeably, but organizations is the name used by Open Referral. So we have, we're just calling agencies organizations inside the data. And sites is same thing. We use the term locations in Open Referral, but exactly the same thing, right? So a site is a location, an agency is an organization, and services are services. So we count these things, and the current count is, I'll show you how the filters work, but the counts are now filtered for data that's equal to NCCARE360. So in other words, even though your database in iCarol has about 16,000 services, there's only, as you can see here, 3,592 services that have been tagged as NCCARE pillar data. And I'll walk through the pillars in a second. In addition to that, there's just a few to get us started metrics that allow you to understand some of the areas in which we sort of need to monitor the data to make sure that there's no gaps or errors. And an example here would be the number of services without a geocode. So this is the number of services in this current data set. So the 3,592 services that make up the NCCARE360 data set, 94 of those services currently do not have a geocode. And what that means is that it doesn't have a latitude or a longitude. So when we plot things on a map, you need to have latitude and longitude. So if you're using Google Maps, for example, the only two pieces of information you need is latitude and longitude, and that'll actually plot a pin onto a map. But if we don't have either the latitude or the longitude, then we can't, of course, create that pin. So we have 94 services in the database that don't have either a latitude or longitude, or the latitude or longitude is outside the boundaries of North Carolina. So some of these services actually might have a latitude or longitude, but it's the location of the service might be in another state, for example, which might be completely legitimate. But basically what we're trying to do is flag here that we've got 94 potential issues with the geocode, which isn't bad considering that there's 3,600 in total. The number of services without eligibility. So again, just trying to put together a few metrics that show or that would highlight for you where there might be some problems with the data. And we can see that with respect to eligibility, all records have something written into the eligibility column. That doesn't mean that what's written is correct or is the way it'll sort of be written in the future for the NCCARE database. But what we know is that there's no blanks based on just looking at this number here, or this box here. The services without service area. So we've got 42 services that don't have a service area attached. And this may not be a bad thing. There's only 42 of them. But this is services that don't have a service area allocated to the service. So if your standard was to have every service related to an area of service, or an area in which that service is accessible from or available within, this would highlight that there's 42 records that need attention. And then the last metric here, just for the purpose of sort of kickstarting off the reports, is the services without hours of operation. You can see again that every service has at least something written into the hours of operation field. So again, the purpose of these metrics is, and we'll build these metrics up over time, there's probably a host of other ones that we need to think about and build out. But the idea is just to sort of highlight these things in a dashboard. So at a glance, you can see almost on a daily basis where there might be some issues that need attention. I'm going to stop there and ask if there's any questions, comments, clarifications.
Andrew.
I think, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say you might get to it, but I was wondering about the income support under the pillars.
Mm-hmm. You're wondering why it's there?
Yes. What is it?
Yeah, that's the taxonomies that in our data team meeting we looked at the other day. There was employment, And then there were all those other ones that were like SSI.
Okay, like SSI. Okay.
Yep. So what they
Gotcha.
decided to do was include both, but separate them out so we could see the difference.
Okay, that makes sense.
Actually, and that's
Okay, thank you.
yeah. Was there another question there? I'm going to jump into that in a second. Actually, thanks for the question.
Yes, this is Lynn. It might be an obvious answer, but for the items number of services without, ideally those numbers should be 0, right?
Sorry, where are you looking, Lynn? Over here?
Yes. So like once we're actively doing our jobs as resource specialists, those numbers should be 0.
Yes, I think so. Unless there's a good reason that they're not 0. And a good example would be that geocode, this 94 here. You might actually have a service location. It might be, say, a hotline that's delivered out of Texas, for example, but it's a legitimate service. And that geocode is outside the North Carolina boundaries, and that's why that one would pop up. But yeah, I think ideally what we're trying to do is flag where there's issues, and then that number greater than 0 would at least make you ask, I need to look at this.
Okay.
Yeah. And I do want to emphasize, and hopefully I've said this already, but can't emphasize enough that this is just a first cut. This is something that I think the data team can look at for now, but I wouldn't use yet this information as gospel truth. We're still testing to make sure that the metrics are presenting correctly, that we've captured the right metrics. So I think it'll give you a sense of just sort of, how does this data look in your database? And it might flag a few things like geocode is probably a good metric to start looking at. But just want to caution you that some of this data still needs to be tested and made sure that it's accurate. Okay, so let's jump over to the pillars by taxonomy. I'm going to show you how the report itself works. Underneath this particular, let's see if I can blow this box up for you here. Okay, so what I've done is just blown up the visual here. And essentially what this is a count of the hi, April.
Hi, thank you. I'm so sorry.
No worries at all. It's Andrew. We've got a number of other people on the line, and we're recording the session, and we're just basically at the point where I'm starting to walk through the reports available for the NCCARE360 data. So what we're looking at here is that one visual blown up where we're showing the count of the NCCARE360 services by pillar. And you can see that we have 6 pillars. There was originally 4, and now there's been 2 added. And essentially how the pillars are created is the pillars identified by a group of taxonomy terms. So what's happening behind the scenes is we count the number of services with one or more of those taxonomy terms assigned, and based on its assignment to a pillar, then we count those services. In the case where a service is associated with more than one pillar, it will show up in both pillars as a count. So for example, if a service is associated with both the food and the housing pillar, then it will be counted in both the food and the housing pillar. Okay. The report itself, I'll just go back to the report here and show you a few things that you can do with these visuals. And let me see if I can blow this up a little bit more there for you. Okay. A few more things that you can do with these visuals is you can stack them. So what we've done with each of the pillars is if we were to click this little button here, we can actually stack. Let me do that in a different way here. Let's see, I don't know if that functionality will, oh, I know why it's being hidden here. Okay. So underneath each of the pillars, you can actually get at the taxonomy assignments for each by a couple of ways to do it. If you want to drive into a particular pillar, you would just select the single down arrow, which represents filter. So I'm going to just click on that. You can tell that's being clicked on because now it's inside of that black background. I'm going to then click on food. And when I do that, what I'm exploding is that count, and I'll just go back up so you can see what happened here. So we have 1,361 food services, and we want to know what's inside of or that distribution of services by taxonomy term. I've got the filter clicked on. I'm going to click on food, and now we can see the distribution of that 1,361 services across the taxonomy terms that make up the food pillar. So this is a way for you to get a sort of a quick view of the total number of services, not only by pillar, but also by taxonomy term assigned. If today you decided that you were going to add another taxonomy term to the pillar, then essentially what I would be doing is updating that database that I provided sort of a quick overview of, and include that in the pillar. And then when you went back into the report, you would see that new taxonomy term assigned with the number of services that it picks up on. So you can do this for each one of the pillars. As long as this little filter down arrow is on, you can navigate through each one of these pillars. And housing has a number of terms associated, so you can see down the left-hand side all the different terms and then the counts that make up that full count. And I won't go through each one of these, but essentially you can get into each one of these pillars, and that's probably the best way to do it, is just by selecting the down arrow. If you were, and God forbid you wanted to do this, the double down arrow, you could actually get the full list of all NCCARE360 resources by taxonomy term. So essentially what this does is it takes all of the taxonomy terms associated with all of the pillars and then gives you a count on your full database. So this isn't actually a bad, I actually should have made that comment to start with, because there's not like hundreds of taxonomy terms. So this isn't a bad way to probably take a look at. If someone had the question, what's your top 5 taxonomy terms assigned to the pillar data, this could allow you to answer that question. And of course, food pantries is number 1 at 789, and by far. Oops. So that is how you can work with the visuals. And again, that's just one visual in drilling into each one of those terms. I won't go through all of the little icons here, but essentially any of the down arrows represent filtering and drilling down into the data with different perspectives on it. So if you wanted to look at the taxonomy terms grouped up by all pillar terms, that's essentially what the down arrow, the double down arrows do. The double down arrows and the split ones rather make more sense for geographic tables, which I'll probably have a few to show you in a moment. So that's how that works. I'm going to show you how the visuals work with one another in a second. I'll just walk through each one separately here. The average number of days since verified. So this is nothing more than a fancy gauge. It's actually not even that fancy, but the gauge essentially is showing the average number of days since services verified. And because we have not filtered any of the data in the visual yet, what we're showing is the average number of days that all NCCARE360 services have been verified since. So we can see here, we're looking at, it looks like a large number, and there's a reason for that. I won't get into that right now, but I want to just sort of demonstrate how the report itself works. So right now we're showing the full 3,592 services because nothing else is filtered in the report. But let's say, for example, we wanted to understand what is the average number of days since only the employment services have been verified. And this is how business intelligence works, is that by clicking on, just take off the filter there. So by clicking on employment, what I'm doing now is I'm filtering on those 502 records, and you can see in the rest of the visuals, they're being filtered as well. So what this means is that employment, and I think we had about 935 days there, when we select only the employment records, you can see there's 502 here showing. You can read it from the pillar, or you can get it from the number of services here. We can see now that we filtered the rest of the visuals because they're all connected. Anything you click on that's a filter will filter the other metrics across the report. So we filtered on employment. It's now more than 1,000 days since verified. Again, an average sometimes isn't the best way to look at data because you can have For example, if you have some data in there that this is active data, but I'll use this as an example. It's not actually that accurate, but if you had inactive records, for example, I'd be in a database for 15 years. Of course, that would, and there was only a small sample of data that could really skew the average. So average you have to be careful with. But nevertheless, the point is that you can filter on other parts of the report, and it will then represent the metrics based on that filter that you've chosen. So
Andrew, you have this only pulling active records from iCarol, right? This wouldn't include any inactive records.
That's correct. So the data is coming over, and I'm going to get into the filters in a moment, and that's a good question, but I actually have the status of the records set to active. So it's filtering out all inactive records.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah. So I clicked on employment, and then to release the filter, you can just click on it again. So that's what I've done. I've released the filter. It's a little bit slow just because of the I've got GoToMeeting going on as well, so it can be slow to respond. But basically, you click to filter, click again to release the filter. All right, so you can do that on any one of the pillars. You could as well, if you wanted to drill in, if you want to look at the average number of days since verified for a particular taxonomy term, you would then drive into that taxonomy term. So here I've drilled into food, and now I'm going to take the drill down mode off because I don't want to drill into anything anymore. I want to filter, and this will become more familiar to you over time. So I'll just introduce you to these terms today and show you the functionality, but over time you'll sort of get the hang of this. But I've turned now the drill down mode off, which means by default it will filter anything I click on. And let's say food soup kitchens. If I filter on food soup kitchens, you'll notice that now the average number of days will be recalculated for these 134 services that have the taxonomy term food soup kitchens associated to it. So that's how you can sort of explore your data if you have specific questions about what's the impact of on average number of days for food pillar versus income support pillar data. These might not be relevant questions at the moment, but the idea is that basically we can use the visuals to examine the different metrics that are presented in the report. So I'm going to go ahead and unfilter that, and I'll just go back up to the sort of the original representation of the page. So we're back to 3,592 services. And the last thing I want to show you is this table, which this table presents the number of services and average days since last verified by location of service. Okay, so what we're doing is we're doing a count on the number of services, and that count is then grouped by city and by county. So the first grouping would be by county, and then we further break that group of, for example, Wake into then cities. So essentially this particular line is showing 184 services in the NCCARE database. So 184 of the 3,592 services are located in the city of Raleigh. And then if we were to total these up, and we don't have subtotals, I should probably show subtotals across the top here, so you don't have to actually add these things up. But then if you wanted to look at the county level, you could also filter the number of services that are within inside of the Wake County as opposed to by city. So it's just the level of granularity that you want to look at. So we'll just, and then we have the average days. I'm going to skip that for a moment. But what we have is a bar which just basically represents the number of services. So it's just a visual way of presenting 184 versus, let's say, 3. So the 3 has a very small bar versus 184 that has a very wide bar. But the application of the filter works the exact same in a table display as it does in a figure. And what I mean by that is that, for example, if we wanted to understand the average number of days since verified, or the number of services without a geocode, or the number of services without a service area attached. If we wanted to filter down on all of the services with a location in Raleigh, we can simply just select the 184 here. You can see now we're only looking at the 184 services, and the rest of the visuals then have changed to filter only on those 184 services. So now we can see we only have one service within the with a location in Raleigh that does not have a geocode, right? So we knew that the location, the city, is in Raleigh, but we don't know exactly where. Sometimes you might not have the geocode for the location for things like shelters. Sometimes are hidden, although we probably should have the center of the city identified as the geocode. But sometimes a geocode, it makes sense that it's not there. But at least you can sort of see by just clicking on the 184 in Raleigh that you don't really have any issues with geocoding. You have no issues with eligibility and no issues with hours of operation in those records. We can also see that the other chart, the number of services by pillar by pillar by taxonomy. And when I say by pillar by taxonomy, when I have two bys, that's a hint to you that underneath, whoops, sorry, I keep going over that. Underneath the bar is another set of bars. That's why when I drill down there, what we're drilling down from was the number of services by pillar, and when we drill down, we're doing by taxonomy terms. So if you ever see by, then that gives you an indication that I've stacked some data underneath. Here, and this is why we're looking at by location. I could have written this by county, by city, but I chose location. I think probably just to get the title in to the table itself. But by filtering the 184, you can see now what's happened in the pillars is it's also filtered the data across the pillars down to 184. So if we were to add up these pillar totals, it would be 184, and you can see the distribution across each one of the across the pillars for these 184 services. I'll go ahead and release that, and we could have also come over and we could have clicked on, I will get the numbers up here as well. I should have the total count for the county and the average number of days, but you can as well select the county. So in this case, I've filtered on the county level, which means that rather than select a city, I've just selected all the cities by default within inside of Wake County. There's 241 services with a location within inside of Wake County for the NCCARE360 data. And then you can see that distribution across the pillars, and then it's recalculating the average number of days since verified. So this is a way to explore, for example, if we're focusing on Guilford County as the first area in which the platform will be deployed, then we could scroll down to, I should have released the filter. Here I'm going to click on Wake County to release it. If we wanted to go down into Guilford, this should probably be sorted alphabetically. It's probably now, it's just doing a sort based on the total number. So we're down here, Guilford is showing up third. Probably do this alphabetically to make it easier for you to find. But in Guilford, if we wanted to just take a look at the sort of the health, if you will, of the data, we'll filter down there. Have 152 services, 75 organizations associated with those services, and 163 locations. The data looks to be fresher on average for Guilford than it is in other counties, which is a good thing. And then we've got 5 records that we would need to take a look at in terms of geocoding. Okay. Again, keep in mind that we still need to test the quality of the data and make sure that that there's no errors here. This was just recently put together. And then we can see the distribution across Guilford, the services where they're located. All right. So that's sort of just a quick walkthrough of each of the components that make up that dashboard. As over time, over the next couple of months, there'll be more pages across the bottom here. So there'll be more reports, more visuals. As you identify specific needs from the data, then we'll build out tables or other visuals or metrics that will help you then look at your data at a glance using the business intelligence tools. I'm going to stop there again and ask if there's questions or clarifications. Okay, hearing none, then I want to introduce you to the filters panel. So the filters panel is a pretty powerful panel, and it will be presented always sort of on the right-hand side of the page. And the filters panel allows you, rather than interacting with the data directly inside the visuals, you can interact with all of the filters that are available on the data. I don't expect you to understand this, but essentially what's happening is that filters apply to the data. So underlying these visuals is a data model with a whole bunch of data in it. When you are filtering the data, you're filtering the data model, and then the visuals that we're looking at now react to changes in the data model. So if you filter the data, the visuals change. The filters are powerful because what you're doing is you're changing that data, and therefore all of the visuals will change as a result. You can see that the default filters are set up. You can see filters on all pages. We'll start here. This is essentially what's called a report level filter. We have, regardless of what page we're on, there's only 3 pages in this report, but whether you're on the dashboard or the services location or the map page, the filter default values are, and there's only 2 of them, that the physical state in which a service is located is filtered on North Carolina. You have data in your database that with programs that have locations outside of North Carolina. They might be legit NCCARE360 services to include, but for now we've got the default filter set on North Carolina. So any resources located outside North Carolina will not show in the visuals. Now I'll show you how to change that as well. The only other report level filter, so applying across all the pages, the filter of status, which is the status of your record in iCarol. So inactive records right now are filtered out because I only have one filter applied, and that's for active. And so in other words, only active records are going to be sort of presented within the data model, and therefore will be counted in the visuals. So those apply to all pages, regardless of what page we're on. Underneath filters on this page, there are the following 5 filters. On pillar, on the taxonomy name applied, on the physical city, so that's the location in terms of the city of where the program resides or is available. The physical county, so if these sort of 2 interact with one another. In the NCCARE360 pillar, this is duplicated, so actually there's only 4 on this page. 1 is duplicated. Anytime a filter is active, the background will show as, and excuse me, I'm partially colorblind, so I think this is like a gray or whatever. But anyways, it's not white. I know that. The background will appear, and that tells you that there is a filter that's active. What I know here is that here the pillar NCCARE360 filter is not active, so it's showing all records. The physical county is clear as well, so there's no filter being applied to physical county. Physical city, there's no filter being applied at the moment, and there's no filter on taxonomy terms. But let's go ahead now and work with the filters. So rather than clicking on anything in the actual diagram, let me get the Guilford. I had to release that filter on the table. So we're going to go in now, keeping in mind that the filter is active on North Carolina and for only records that have an active status. We're going to go in and take a look at this first active filter. So what is this one? This pillar NCCARE360 filter, which is the same as this one. I'll take out the duplicate after the call. But what by default we filtered on is only records within the North Carolina 211 database that have a pillar associated with it. So keeping in mind that there's about 15,000 programs and services that are in the North Carolina 211 broader database, we filter the records only on those 15,000 that are associated to a pillar. And of course, there's only about 3,600. And the reason that we're only showing 3,600 is that this blank, meaning no pillar assigned, is not clicked. If I was to go ahead and click this, excuse me, I just have to, oh, that's coming through. Yeah, just ignore that. So now when I release that filter, you can see that there's the 15,000 showing. So what this means is that we're showing all of the data within inside of the, essentially your iCarol system. Think of it that way. Because we have 13,412 records or programs, services that do not have a pillar assigned. And probably rightly so, because remember, the pillars are essentially a subset of your records that are identified by taxonomy term. So by selecting or turning off the filter, we're now showing all of that data. So if you wanted to look at, for example, rather than look at the default, if you're only interested in looking at food in this report, for example, you could select the food pillar, and what will happen is all of the data in all the visuals will filter on only food, and you can see now we have 1,361 services that are within the food pillar. You can see that we now only have one bar in this visual because there, of course, none of the other bars apply because they're non-food pillars, or they're not a pillar at all. And then the data in the table for county and by city with its metrics of number of services and average number of days is filtered only on food. So this is an easy way to sort of work with data inside the page without having to work with the visuals. If you want to select more than one pillar, then you can hold the control key down and select multiple boxes. So it's very much like Windows. So think about when you're working with Windows, it basically is, it's because it's a Microsoft product, you can pretty much do any of the shortcuts or the keyboard clicks that you can do with Windows. Okay, so I can go ahead and select all, and I'll release the blank pillar. So we're only looking at the NCCARE360 data. So we're back to 3,600 services. And I'll walk through a few more of these. So you notice now that the background is lit up because the filter is applied on the pillars, but we don't have any background on name, city, physical county, and I'll forget the NCCARE, that's a duplicate. So let's take a look at name for a moment. So what we haven't filtered on is any particular taxonomy term inside of, let's see if I can blow that up for you a bit. There we go. What we haven't done is filtered on any particular taxonomy term. In other words, all the pillars are showing, and all the taxonomy terms associated with each of those pillars is also not being filtered. But we can filter. So, and let me do this with food. So go back and I'll select just food. And these filters are interactive as well. So if we now take a look at the food pillar, and we look for a taxonomy term associated, and sorry, this is a lot to scroll through here. I just want to sort of make the point. This isn't perfectly set up yet. So if we go down to a food bank here, so food stamps, I think that's in the model. If I select food stamps, then what's going to happen? Oh, I didn't hit that properly, did I? Food stamps, there we go. Now the 101 records with food stamps as the taxonomy term applied is now filtered on. So rather than looking at that full list of food services, we're now looking at only those with the food stamps taxonomy term applied. So just the point is basically that you have these set of filters that you're able to drill into or out of the data by pillar or by taxonomy term. I think the best way to actually, that particular use case of it, where you're looking at taxonomy terms within a pillar, it's probably easier to work with inside of the actual visual itself. But these are the kinds of things that you sort of figure out as you work with the data.
Andrew.
Yeah.
Tabitha, so I have a question. I was running reports this morning, in iCarol, and I'm wondering if we could do it right here versus in an iCarol. So I had it filtered to all of the pillars, but then filtered it to specific counties. I did Alamance and Guilford.
Mm-hmm.
Active, but I guess my question is there a way in here that either you can add or maybe it's not possible to say just records that haven't been verified within the last year?
Yes, there are. And that's a great, so we're getting into probably a good use of Excel. So where there are detailed questions where the report doesn't allow you to answer the question, but you know the data can, I'm going to show you how to use Excel that you can actually drill into a lot more detail and investigate the data in a way that you can't through the reports. The other option is that where there is important metrics that aren't presented in the report now that should be, I just need to know that, and I'll build out those metrics and plot them out onto the report for you. But that's a great example. But I'll give you sort of an example of what we use for call reports, or sorry, not call reports, but last updated in another set of reports I've built for Ontario was we grouped the reports by updating the last 30 days, the last 90 days, the last year, and more than a year. So essentially you only have 4 categories, and you can see the distribution of counts across the categories. So it's just a matter of identifying what those metrics are that you would like to have presented on the report, and then I just build the metric and then plot it out for you.
Okay, I'll think about that and let you know. Thank you.
Absolutely. And part of this will be to get us thinking about what metrics that you would like to have at your fingertips almost every morning to see where there might be issues that you need to sort of dig into further. So this is just sort of this is only the beginning in terms of building out the reports. The last 2 areas are city and county, and this is always the grouping of data in business intelligence is typically you group by county and then you group by city. So depending on sort of how large an area you want to look at, you can filter on county or city or both. So in the case of county, you'll have a list of all of your different counties, of course. And if you want to select a particular one, let's say Buncombe, it'll filter data inside the report. You can see the visuals change. It'll filter, and now see we only have the cities that make up Buncombe with data in iCarol appearing. So that's the advantage of the filter. A lot of time you've got a lot of data points underneath, and by using those filters on the right-hand side, you can really just focus in on what it is that you want to look at. We still have food, obviously, up here. I'll release that filter and just put it back onto NCCARE360 records. And then in the case of wanting to look at cities, same thing. So you would then just go in and filter on a particular city that you're interested in. So that's basically how the filters work. Again, it applies either at the page level, so all filters underneath that title, right down to the next organization of filters, which is filters on all pages. So filters on all pages is, in other words, the report level filter, which is all pages, and then you have page level filters, which applies only to the page that we're looking at. So we're looking at a page right now. Okay, I'm going to show you then the next page of the report and describe what it is. And actually, I have to take off some of these I can do that through here. I'll describe what it is, and then I'll show you how the 2 pages interact with one another. So what we're showing here is the number of locations. So what we're doing is we're counting the number of locations, not the number of services, but the actual number of locations. So if one program is delivered in 3 different locations, what we're counting here is the 3 locations as opposed to the 1 service. We're counting services on the previous page. So it's a little bit different look into your data, but there's some powerful sort of interactions between the previous page and this page that I'll demonstrate in a second. So we'll just concentrate on this particular this is called a donut chart. The hole in the pie chart basically is a donut chart. And what we're showing is the total number of locations with, and I'll take off, we've got blank here. So again, I'm going to use the filters pane. I'm just going to come in here and I'm going to select only the NCCARE360 data. You can see essentially I'm filtering out blank. So now we're looking at the NC360 data, CARE360 data, and food obviously is the biggest category of the NCCARE360 data, followed by housing, interpersonal violence, so on and so forth, up to income support. And within each of these, I do believe I built I think you can drill down into taxonomy term on this as well. Maybe you can't. No, I don't think you can on this one. So I'll probably build a drill down on this so that you can drill into the taxonomy terms as well underneath each pillar. But essentially you get a donut chart showing the total number and the percentage of the total. So about 1 in every 3 NCCARE360 services is a food-related service. Underneath we have the number of locations by type. So we're counting locations, not services. And then we're showing that count. Oh, sorry, this is why I didn't stack it, because I've actually presented it in a separate visual. So when we select, for example, the food, so this is a filter, there is no ability to drill down in this particular visual. So when I click on food, what you'll notice is only the taxonomy terms that apply to food will be showing in the second visual. This is why I built this. Just had a moment there. So what we're showing now is the count of locations across taxonomy terms associated with the food pillar. If I clicked on the food pillar to release it and then went into transportation, now I'm looking at the count of locations across the taxonomy terms associated to transportation. So it's just a different view of the data depending on what your perspective is, whether you're trying to sort of get a sense of the number of locations or the number of services. The first page, the resource dashboard, focuses on services. The second page focuses on locations in terms of the visuals. The last piece of information presented in this report, I'll just get rid of all the filters here, is a table listing that shows and you can see from the title, the agency, the service, and the service locations. So let me find another one that makes a little bit more sense here. Okay. So starting from the outer left, everything's indented. So we basically go agency, service, service location. So the name of the agency is A Small Miracle, and we have the description of the agency is being concatenated. So this is coming from your iCarol database. So if you were to look up the agency record for A Small Miracle, that's the organization A Small Miracle, you would see the description associated with it, and this is the description. As well, I provide the iCarol ID for easy reference. So this can help in a couple of ways. The unique IDs come through the database, which is helpful for me, but also when you're looking at your data in iCarol, you can cross-reference the data you're looking at with the ID. So every iCarol, whether it's organization, service, or location, will provide you that unique ID that you can cross-reference. That's what this is here, the iCarol ID. And I also provided the last verified date. The time is sort of irrelevant. It doesn't matter what time you did it during the day. But you can get a sense here of the exact date in which the record was last verified. So before we were looking at counts. And that's helpful if you're doing like bigger statistics like average or total number of services that haven't been verified for the last 3 months, for example. But what this gives you a more granular look at the data. And I'm going to show you how sort of the two pages interact in a second. So the organization and its description, the service name and its description, and then the last piece, which is not highlighted, is the actual locations. So in this case, we've got one organization. You'll only ever have one organization. You'll have, as it's grouped together. You have the service description, and then you have the service at locations. So this is the location information for this service. So the service equal to innovations waiver with this description here, I won't read it out, has multiple locations in which this program is delivered. And then you can see the name of the location as well as the actual address associated to the location here. This, obviously a big table, and even if you're only using it to sort of filter on a particular pillar, it's still going to show you a tremendous amount of data, and it's probably not as helpful as what it might first appear. But let me show you how you can use this. Obviously, if you wanted to look at just these 100 liquid nutrition records, it will filter the list on the right-hand side. So that's one way you can use it. But probably a more powerful way is to couple it with geographic location. Make sure I'll just release all these filters so you can see how this works. So let me go back now into the dashboard. And let's go up into, let's stay in Buncombe. And what we're interested in is looking at these. Let me pick another. Alexander has 3 services, and we can see that it looks like they've been updated within the last 4 or 5 months on average. But we're interested in understanding what those 3 services are. You can't get it from this page. All you have are those big counts. You can see other information that we've already walked through, right? We have these statistics, but what are these 3 records? If you right-click over Alexander and you go down to drill through, you can now apply these filters to the other pages and be brought to those pages automatically. So all I've done is right-clicked on the Alexander row. I could have clicked anywhere in here. I could have clicked over here, anywhere within inside the row. Click drill through, and now I'm going to select the agency services locations, which is the title of this page here. So that's how you know where you're going. I want to now go to agency services location through drill through, and what that will do is filter only on these 3 records so I can get a sense of what those are. And now when this table populates, you can see that I had 3 services. It looks like it's more than that, but if you actually take a look at the services here, there's duplicates, and I might have everything. Let's make sure I've got everything. Yeah, so what we have here is you can see the duplication coming through because, and that's expected because we have multiple locations that one service is delivered through. And there might be, I'm just looking at this too, there might be a little bit of a mistake, but the point is, once it's corrected, that essentially you can drill through from one page to another, applying those filters that you chose in the previous page to then look at data that's presented differently in another page. So in this case, we can look at those records for only Alexander, and I might have a filter on. No, and you can see the filters have automatically been applied. Over here, I didn't do that. That was something that was applied through the drill through functionality. So this can be a nice way to sort of move back and forth between the records. That's probably one of the best use cases for the geographic data that presents in the dashboard. Or even if you want to do if I release the Buncombe filter here. Oh, it's here. I'll release it here. So now I'm back to all of the. I've got a filter here too. You can tell the filter's on, of course, if the background is there, but also I can tell because the full bars aren't there, so there's still being a filter being applied here. Oh, it's because must be applied over here. Oh yeah, it's applied over here. So once you start working with the filters, you just have to be careful of what's being turned on and off, like I just demonstrated by mistake. So now we're back and we've got all the data unfiltered. And if we wanted to filter on these 141 income support pillar data pieces, you can do the exact same thing. Drill through and look at the 141 programs, and of course that's going to be a lot because now we're looking at all the locations associated with it as well. But this will become useful as you start navigating through, and we might figure out other ways in which to filter through the reports. But that essentially is the data, detailed data presented on the service listings. I'm going to release all these filters, and we'll go into the last page. Okay, that's good. And I just need to release the income support filter. And we'll go into the last page here. The last page is a map, and this is a plotting of the locations. And of course, the only thing you can plot is a location because the geocode, of course, is based on site. So essentially what we're presenting on this map is, and you'll see how this works in a second, but we're presenting in a visual way, the services, employment, food, housing, interpersonal violence, income support, transportation, and as well non-pillars, but those are filtered out, but it's there in the legend, just in case you had the filter not applied. But essentially what we're showing is every single one of the 3,600. Now it's clustered, so we don't see the actual points. You can see that obviously there's an overlap of these points. But right now, might look pretty, but it's not useful. This is basically a visual rendering of the locations across North Carolina, and not very helpful for me. I'm not a big fan actually of maps, but this can be helpful in some situations. I'm colorblind, so it doesn't really help me a lot. I can't distinguish between the colors, and often you're working with many different groupings. So for me, trying to distinguish between housing and transportation is an absolute nightmare. But for those who don't have any visual impairments, then it's sometimes it'd be quite easy to work with. And I'll show you the power of the map in a second. But right now we're showing a plotting of all of the places on the map. The first thing and why I do find it useful sometimes to use map is right away, without even having those geocode issues noted on the first report. I'm going to reload this report here. So when it first loads, what you will notice is I'm not focused on North Carolina. And that's because the map is presenting all of the data points for the NCCARE360 data. And you have a couple of points here, and I'm assuming that this one's incorrect because it's in the middle of the ocean. And this one's probably incorrect. Although that might be on land somewhere, although it looks like it's in the ocean as well. Some of these others might be legit, because it might be a hotline, for example, delivered through another state. But right away, visually, you know, wow, we probably should check this one. And I can tell you right now, there is no latitude and longitude associated, because you can see from the rollover here, once I leave it, it goes. But you can see at the top there, latitude and longitude is null. So what it has done is it's tried to estimate where that point is. If a latitude and longitude was correctly associated with it, this point would not be here, and I'm assuming that it would be somewhere inside North Carolina state. And then, of course, the map would completely change. So assuming that this point wasn't there, essentially when you load this map, it's going to basically be only the boundary. So it's going to look something like, with all latitude and longitudes for only North Carolina applied, this is sort of how your map is going to load. It's going to look like this, because it's basically going to put a boundary around North Carolina. So that's what it's going to by default look like. But the fact that it didn't load like this and had those points out in the ocean, sort of helpful to highlight that some of those geocodes need to be looked at. Okay, so why is this powerful? So we've got all the data presented. This is a heat map. So a heat map basically shows, and heat being like red for lots of heat, lots of density, versus less density, which tends to be blue, or just showing right through the layer into the base map. Basically what we're showing here, and because there's so many points, it almost doesn't make sense, but we can see that the density of your programs are located around the Raleigh-Durham area. And if we scroll in a little bit more, you can start to see that these areas, so the density of the programs and services, have locations in places, of course, which you would expect, which are the more populated areas across the state. This is quite, this is impressive to me, having worked with a number of states and provinces with their data. Typically, you see much bigger holes, or you see like a lot of clumps with a lot of sort of bare areas, meaning that there's not many programs outside of the bigger cities. And we know there are some, but this is this shows that there's a lot of programs and services located throughout North Carolina and pretty good coverage as well. So that would be my first, without knowing anything about which I do know about the North Carolina data, but looking at this data set, you think, pretty good coverage compared to some of the other 211 states that I've seen. They tend to be more spotty and concentrated in just the cities. But regardless, it's still not helpful as a visual. This is where the filter pane comes in handy. So for example, if we wanted to take a look at only the programs and services located, let's go down into Guilford, since that'll be one of the first areas. We're just going to hone into, I scrolled over it right here, Guilford. So now we're going to filter, and what's going to happen now is the map is going to redraw, and boom, there now we have all of the programs and services that have a physical location in the county of Guilford. That's different than service area, which I can demonstrate in a second. But the physical location inside of the county of Guilford now we're plotting on the map. Still not easy for me to distinguish because of the 6 different categories and different colors. So for me, I would have to really rely on the filter. So if I was interested in looking at only food, then select that from the pillar right here. Let's look at only food. And now I don't have to worry about the colors because the data is just going to filter out. And now we can see the actual locations in the county. And then if we roll over each of the points, it'll give you, essentially in the form of a tooltip, a snapshot of some of the more important data. Including the name of the organization, name of the service, and the city within the county that's located, and the address. And as well at the bottom, you'll see the number of locations as well. If this service was associated with more than one location, so if there were a couple of locations in the county for this service, then you would see a different number there, like 2 locations. And that would give you a hint. And then the iCarol ID for service is available in the tooltip too if you wanted to investigate this data within inside the iCarol system. The last thing, I won't demonstrate this, I'll just mention it, that if you can drill through to the map, so any of the filters or visuals that are on the other pages, if you want to drill through and have these filters automatically applied to the map, that will happen, just like I demonstrated for the agency services locations table. I should mention actually as well, you've got your counts up here, just an easy look at the number of services, number of organizations and locations being presented within the context of the filters that you've selected, and of course on the map here. That's a quick overview of the first 3 pages of the reports, and not so much about I don't want to sort of suggest that this is now data that you want to start working with. I think today's presentation is really just focused on showing you the type of data that's in there and the interactivity that business intelligence provides for you to investigate some of the issues, perhaps highlight issues in the data that allow you to quickly sort of go and address or correct what those problems might be. I'm going to stop there and just open up for just any questions, comments, clarifications at this point. And then the last thing I'm going to show you is the Analyze in Excel feature.
I have a question. This is Lynn.
Mm-hmm.
Andrew, could you go over again why there was the 33,000 blank data point? Like, why would it, what's the reason behind it being 33,000?
Sorry, remind me, 33,000, where did I show that?
It was under when we were reviewing pillars, and you had said something about 33,000 blank data points, and I missed why it may be blank versus assigned to a pillar.
Oh, sorry, I must have misspoke. That number's too high. What I can tell you, Lynn, is there's about 15,000 services in the iCarol database for North Carolina 211. But of those 15,000, there are only about 3,600. You can see it here, 3,600 that have been selected as what's being called pillar data for the NCCARE360 initiative. So the state repository that others will have access to, it's not your full database. It will only be a subset of records that have been determined to be either related to one or more of the pillars. So if it's not related to food, housing, interpersonal violence, employment, transportation, or income support, it's not part of the NCCARE360 data. And there's about 9 or 10,000 records, actually a little bit more than that. There's about 11,000 records that do not have a pillar associated with it and therefore will not be part of the NCCARE360 state repository, but are still in your NC211 database. The 33,000, I must have misspoke because there's nothing 33,000 like about this data.
I think I see where she's getting it. On the top right, under that first pillar NCCARE360, blank says 33,621.
Oh, up here. Yeah. Right. No, ignore that. That's not helpful information. I wouldn't ever read from the filter numbers up here. That's probably a little bit more advanced, and I wouldn't take anything away from that. These are simply filters. These aren't meant to be visuals that you actually read information from. Yeah, you're right though. It does say 33,000 up there. I'll have to take a deeper look into that.
Also, what you just explained doesn't explain why there would be 33,621 blank data points.
No. What that is, it's likely underneath in the data model. There are all the data sort of mashed together. So in that case, that might be, and this is just a guess, that might be the sum of all the locations and all of the organizations and all of the services with blank attached to it. So so not very helpful.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, I wonder if that is, I'll just take a look at the other. Here's the other pillar here. Let's see if it says the same thing here. Yeah, it says 33,000 as well. Yeah, I'm assuming it's probably the sum of those three things, which isn't helpful to you at all. And I'll take a look at that again. Any other questions, clarifications? You don't need to know all this. There's no test, and there's no. I'm going through a lot of this quickly. Typically, this is broken out into several training sessions that would gear you up on how to use BI, but it's not really a how to use BI session. It's more about a crash course on the functionality available and the type of data that we're starting to look at. But we have lots of time here over the next several months to sort of get the reports correct so that they're useful for you for the years to come. Shall I jump in then to the Excel component? And I'll introduce you to this functionality, and then I think that's probably enough for today, and then we can talk about what next steps are.
Okay.
All right. We have about 20 minutes left, which is perfect. So we're back now to that sort of main screen. So I had this all blown up so you couldn't see sort of the chrome around the outside here, but now we're back inside the user interface for Power BI. And it's pretty skimpy right now. We only have one report with 3 pages, and we only have one data set. Now, of course, you have to have a data set if you have a report. It doesn't have to be the opposite. You can have one data set and no reports, but it can't be the other way around. You always have to have data. So the report, I have already created a bunch of visuals, put it onto pages, and you've seen those visuals and those pages already. But sometimes you're going to want to interact with the same data that I'm using to create the reports. There are a couple of things you can do. You can actually create your own reports. I wouldn't suggest you do this, but essentially what I've done is I've just clicked on the data sets. And in the particular data set is NCCARE360-data. And essentially what this is the data model with the data that's used to create the reports. And you can see that, I'll blow this up for you, over here on the right-hand side. And this is, as I was mentioning before, we had that proprietary iCarol structure, which is a whole bunch of tables that you never need to know what they are, what they look like, because then we transform them into the 14 to 18 human services data specification tables. But then that's still too much to work with. So what we've done is it's called denormalizing, but really what it just means is we take all the data from the 14 to 18 tables and we pump it back into a simpler model, which looks very much like the AIRS model, right? Agency site locations, or in our case, organization service location. So all of the data that's used to create those reports sit within inside of one of these four tables. The classification table is, I'll show you what that is in a moment, but that's basically where all your taxonomy terms and pillar tags come from. I'll show you how to use that in a moment. And then you've got this other, it's not showing as a table. Power BI presents it nicely, but this is where all your metrics are. So those metrics that I was presenting in the reports, the number of locations, number of services, these are predefined calculations that you can use in either a report or within Excel. And I'll just demonstrate this very quickly just so you can see why it's here. When I create reports, I don't do it I'm working with inside of Chrome, so I should have mentioned that at the start, but I'm inside of Google Chrome is the browser, and all this work can be done through Chrome. And here I've got a blank. When I opened up the data set and it presented, basically it created what is essentially a new report. There's nothing in it yet, haven't been saved or anything, but if you wanted, and I don't recommend you do this, but I'll just demonstrate how it can be done. If we wanted to recreate that report, or that visual, I should say, of number of services by pillar, I think that visual was turned around, so let's turn it around. So I'm just changing the visual, which I won't go through any of this today, but be happy to sort of do another little training course on this. But right now we're looking at, and you actually don't even really know what we're looking at, the counts or anything, so I'm just going to put the data labels on it. And let's make that the actual number for the data labels, and we'll make it a lot bigger. There we go. So now we're looking at the total count of services, and we are looking at, of course, it's not filtered on any pillar, so we're showing your entire database. So let's go ahead and now use this classification table. So all we've done is just plopped a metric onto a chart, which is a sideways bar chart. And I'm going to go into classification, and you'll see a number of columns in here. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense yet because we're still working on the data model, but the data's here. We've got this pillar NCCARE360 pillar. I'm going to drag that and drop it on top. And now what we've done is essentially, and I'll blow this up a little bit more so you can see the labels a bit better. But essentially, I've just recreated that chart from the first report that shows the total number of services broken out by pillar. Now, of course, we filtered out the blank, the blanks in that, so I could have gone in and just removed the blanks if I wanted, but I'm not going to do that for this for today. But we've got that now. By interacting with the data model, we can create our own reports. So very much like, think about it like in Excel where you're dragging and dropping and creating pivot tables. That's essentially what we're creating here, is we're creating a pivot table that's represented in the form of a visual. That's it. What's probably more important, I'll just move this off to the side for a moment. Actually, let's release this. If we wanted to look at it by taxonomy term, this will be ugly because it's going to drop every single taxonomy term. Probably take too long as well. But essentially what it's going to do then is break up the total number of count of your 15,064 services by taxonomy term. And you can see there's every single taxonomy term in the database with the counts on number of services. So you don't have many services with service cost payment assistance associated, but you have a lot with food pantries associated, okay, which would be expected. But more importantly, let's get rid of that for a moment. And let's now take a look at something a little bit different. Let's ask the question, how many let me ask the question, how many services, how many locations, no, that's not a good question, sorry. How many services within the service area equals, that covers, again, let's try Guilford. See if we can do that rather quickly. So we just do number of services, and what we want to do is then ask we start with just breaking out by service area. And this is going to take a little while to understand. Let me blow this up as well for you here. It'll take a while to understand what data is in each one of these tables, but because there's only 4 tables, it probably won't take too long. We've got the metrics, which are obviously just the counts, and then we've got these other things that you can count by. So whenever we do a table or a chart and we say total number of services by county, by city, those bys are basically fields in tables. So if we wanted to do total number of services, which we plotted here, we'll put the number on there so you can see it. Make it a lot bigger. And what we want is by service area. Well, service area, I know, you wouldn't know this yet, but is on the service table. So now we've got this field called service area county. So each service is marked with one or more service areas. We just drop that over top of the 15,064. We now have our total services by, and at the bottom here, I won't blow that up anymore, but basically we have by each of the service areas. So it's pretty powerful. You can see all the different fields that are available to do analysis. So you can ask any question of the data, as long as it has a metric, and we can create more metrics, but you can basically analyze your data by metrics and then cross it with a number of different sort of perspectives, if you will, which is basically one or more fields. So that by thing. So this is not the easiest. This isn't a quick way. This isn't how an analyst would work with the data. This is really meant to be an environment, and you wouldn't usually use Chrome as well. You would use Power BI desktop tool, which is essentially a report creation tool. So if you're creating reports, then that's a process in which you're trying to create a set of information in the form of visuals or tables that you want to represent for broader use and for frequent use by others. That's not an ad hoc use of sort of the data. Ad hoc use of the data, which is typically what data analysts are doing, is supported by this thing called Analyze in Excel. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll just get rid of this for a moment. I'm not going to save that, so I'm just going to move off of that just so it doesn't get saved and come back into the data set. Now we have a clean canvas. Okay, so again, we have the location organization service that organizes all the fields, the things you can analyze your metrics by. This will make more sense over time. So just be aware of that we've got these 3 important tables: location organization service, modeled after the AIRS agency site service terminology, and the classification, which is your pillar and your taxonomy terms. Oh, by the way, name level 1 through 5 is just if you have a taxonomy term, food banks, then I'm not an expert on the taxonomy terms, but if that's a second level term, for example, and the first level term that it's grouped to is basic needs, then basic needs would be the first level term. So I've just sort of made it easier for you to break things or do analysis by whatever level of the taxonomy you want to look at. Again, that'll make more sense when you start working with it. What's more important for ad hoc analysis is this thing called Analyze in Excel. You'll notice that the ellipses here represented by the 3 dots. If you click on these 3 dots, you'll be provided with a menu, and one of those items is Analyze in Excel. If you click on Analyze in Excel, I'll describe what happens and I'll do it. The Analyze in Excel option essentially creates from your desktop a connection between Excel, which runs on your desktop, and I believe everyone has an Office 365 license with a premium subscription or business premium, which you should have then the Excel tool license. Then when you click on Analyze in Excel, essentially a connection is made from your desktop between Excel that runs on your desktop and the data set this data set here, which is in the cloud. So essentially, it's an automatic creation between Excel and the data set that we use for, well, basically has all your iCarol data in it. So let me go ahead and demonstrate that. When I click on Analyze in Excel, you'll notice down the bottom left-hand corner, there's a little file being downloaded. That file, it's always like what's called an ODC file. It's like an Office Data Connection file. But essentially, by clicking on that Office Data or Office Data Connection, because you have Office 365 installed, it's going to recognize what it is, and it brings you directly to this screen, which you'll always get this. It's a security notice, so it's basically saying, are you sure you want to do this? And it's always fine, but this is very typical. So you just hit enable. And now when I enable it, you're almost always going to get this message, which looks like, oh, it's not working. It actually is working. You just click OK. And what this is basically saying is that Excel, on your behalf, wants to connect to the data set. You yourself have been provided permissions. Well, I've already provided them. In Power BI, I've given everyone access to the data set so that when you click OK, you'll have this experience that I'm having right now, is that you just sign in with your account. Mine is Andrew Benson at unitedwaync.org. Then I'll be challenged for my password. And once I enter in my credentials, that connection then is enabled. And now what you can see is that by enabling it, I am now presented, rather than this view of the data, which is basically a report creating environment. This is Power BI Google. I'm actually now have the full power of Excel, which has tons of features, right? Charting, so many things you can do with data. I can't even start to explain all the different ways you can work with data in Excel. But now you basically can work with all of the data, the metrics, the table that includes the fields for classification, all of the fields for location, hours of operation, the location, latitude, longitude, state, mailing address, everything. Organization and all the fields inside of organization, like description of the organization, the ID, phone numbers attached to it, tax status. And under service, which is the last table, we have all the information associated with services, application process, eligibility, so on and so forth. Why this is powerful, and again, this is not meant to be a training session to sort of get you to be an expert in using the Analyze in Excel feature, but I can demonstrate, rather than working in a reporting environment, you can work very quickly in Excel against the data set, because you're querying essentially the NCCARE360 database. So I want to look at the number of services, and then I want to look at the total number of services by, let's say in location. I want to look at total number of services by, let's do it by county, and I think there's 100 counties in North Carolina. So now what we're doing is we're performing a query against the data. Now we have the total number of services in the full iCarol database by county, and you can see how quick that was. And you're querying the data in the database. And if we wanted to look at the total number of services by county by city, we would then just go into the location. Sorry, I'm scrolling so quickly here. The city, physical city, and you get to know these terms after a while. You drop that underneath, and what it's going to do then is do that exact same table I created in the report, but now it's going to be at your fingertips in Excel, and now you can see that's a blank county. So those are things that would have to be looked at as part of the data review. But we've got, if we go down into Guilford, for example, that's going too far. Let me stay up at Buncombe. Total number of services by city and grouped by county. And the last thing, if we wanted to take a look at the total number of services by city grouped within county, but wanted to look at the pillar grouping of that data, we'll just go grab the pillar from the classification, throw that into the columns. And now what we're going to get is a pivot table that counts the number of services within each city, grouped by county, but also then by pillar. This is a pretty big query, so it might take a second for it to populate. But what we'll see now is about 6 or 7 columns of data that is going to break out these total number of services now by pillar, because right now it's not differentiated by pillar. So that's just an example. I know I've sort of gone through this quickly and thrown a lot at you, but this essentially is just demonstrating the power of the data that's being created, not only for use inside the state repository, so Unitas can connect to it, but it also provides you with sort of some good analytical tools to ensure that your database is high quality and up to date. And here you can see the result of that query. That is analyzed in Excel, and this will probably be a friend of yours. What we could also do is create a number of templates that will have pre-populated worksheets in Excel, so you don't have to build out these worksheets all the time. You can create your own worksheets, and you can actually refresh the data from the database. So that's all part of the tools that are available. Whoops, back in the data tools, you can refresh all that data. So if I hit that button, which I won't, it basically will go back to the database and refresh all the tables, because keep in mind that the data is changing second by second. So anytime you make a change in iCarol, it's replicated across into the data and will be reflected in the data showing in these tools. Okay, I'm going to stop there. We've covered a tremendous amount of ground, and we've only actually had a couple of pages in a report to show. So the process over the next number of months will be, as we sort of get to know one another and we're getting into the work of data management, we'll be asking sort of what are the metrics that you need to track. So I'll be adding metrics, creating new ports. We'll do some more training as we go through, kind of these 1 or 2 hour segments. And you can always ping me as well. By email is probably easiest. You can ask some questions. I'd be happy to either jump onto a screen share with you, or we can just pool all the different questions and then hold a session together. But essentially, this was just the first of probably many sessions to come. So I'm gonna stop there and ask if there's any questions, comments, clarifications around what you've seen today, and if you have any suggestions as to what we might do next. If we can't get it into today's call, then just flip it to me by email, and I'll consider it.
I just had one quick thing. This is Leah. I was grabbing water when you showed how to pull from the Power BI thing into Excel. Could you just show me really quick how to do that?
Sure.
Okay. Sorry.
No worries. No worries. So we basically the process to connect in Excel. Mm-hmm. In data sets, there's only one data set here. There might be multiple in the future, but right now there's only one. You're essentially making a connection between Excel on your desktop and the data set. You hit Analyze in Excel.
Gotcha. That's what I missed.
Oh, that's it? Okay, yeah. And then from there.
That's it. That's all I missed. Thank you.
And the beauty of this session, or I don't know if it's beautiful or not, it's 2 hours of me rambling, but is it's being recorded. So it will be posted and there will be a link. So feel free to go back into any of the material. If I've covered it, great. Then you just need to review it. And if there's any gaps in the content or presentation, just let me know and we'll cover it next time.
Thank you.
So can I ask, was this, how did this work for folks? Was it too much? Was it just right? Did you get a sort of a good sense of, what's available? Didn't want it to be a training session per se, but I want to just get some feedback from you as to whether this worked for you. Visually, you could see everything, you could hear, you had enough opportunity to ask questions. Any suggestions that will help me work better with you, I'm all ears. And believe me, I love getting the feedback because it's not, I don't take it as a criticism. I always want to sort of just make sure that the experience is better for you in the future.
So this is Tabitha. Andrew, I know your intent was that everybody had Power BI before this and could potentially follow along, but there weren't enough licenses. And but I did pull mine up and followed along and was able to kind of do that Excel thing, and I started playing with it and whatnot. So I do think that once we have accounts created for everybody, it would be good to do another one that's more hands-on so they can apply things as you're talking about it too.
Sounds good. How about I set up a session 2 weeks from now, same time, and I'll just make it for an hour, and I can go through, maybe hit the highlights, but just leave more time for people to ask questions, knowing that they probably worked with it a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
That's Christmas.
Exactly, it's Christmas.
Exactly 2 weeks.
So what's the problem? You don't want to do this on Christmas Day? Yeah,
Probably not.
I totally lost track. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know what?
Up on us.
Let's see how things go over the next week. I can hop on a call next week if helpful. If not, then we'll have to pick it up very early in the new year. But also, I can do one-on-one sessions. If you're looking at something, I can jump on a screen share for 10 minutes and help you out as well. So if you're stuck with anything, then let's do a one-on-one screen share, and then we'll figure out when to meet again. Yeah, we won't meet on Christmas Day. Okay, folks. Well, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you very much for your time. Any questions, you can get to me, Andrew Benson at expound.ca. Tabitha has my coordinates. You probably find it from the meeting invite as well. So feel free to reach out to me. I'll try and get back to everyone within 48 hours max. If I'm not traveling, then I should be able to do that for you. And you should probably I'm assuming that you probably have licenses and availability to all this functionality within the next 48 hours as well. Recording will be posted. I'll put it in a private location on my YouTube channel somewhere, but it'll be private link, so it's not publicly available, but anyone who has the link will be able to get the video there and send that out after it's ready, which should be a couple hours from now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Bye.
Bye now.
Bye.